Okay, thank you. Thank you very much, Luciana. So my presentation will follow 5 fundamental points, as you can see on the slide. The starting point is the definition of interactional competence in second language learning, mentioning some difficulties that this construct represents for language teachers and testers. Then we are going to see some specificities of online interaction. Interaction is of paramount importance in both traditional and virtual classrooms, but in the later it is particularly affected by the limitations of the medium and requires specific skills from the teacher. Then I will shortly present 2 researches we realized last year, a research based on conversation analysis that gave us rich empirical evidence about some critical issues and also about some good practices, and a survey we administered to our language teachers in order to investigate the difficulties they encountered in teaching online and the solutions adopted. Finally, I will propose some considerations about the competencies that teachers need to use interaction to mediate and assist language learning. The concept of interactional competence traces back to Heim's view of communicative competence as knowledge of how to use language appropriately in a social context. However, in Heim's model, but also in later models that applied Heim's vision to language education and testing, the components of communicative competence were considered statically as cognitive properties or abilities of the individual. The importance of interaction in language learning has been highlighted by a number of studies, starting with Cramsch in 1986, who provided a contrast between the concept of proficiency and the concept of interaction, arguing that an oversimplified view of human interactions could make difficult to reach a true interactional competence. But it was only from the 1990s that a more dynamic and socioculturally grounded interpretation came to be adopted through the works of Hall and Young. With the words of Campbell and Larsen, we could define interactional competence as the ability of speakers to co-construct a turn or a series of turns in the here and now of the unfolding interaction that balance speaker intent with recipient design. The development of conversation analysis research on second language users talk effectively both about a better understanding of the situated and co-constructed nature of interaction as a process in which social actions are accomplished on a moment-by-moment basis, as De Jong states in her paper on fluency in second language testing. Research in the field of applied linguistics, taking in knowledge from conversation analysis, has emphasized the interactional aspect of fluency in dialogue, which is described by McCarthy as confluence. This interactional aspect posits that participants in dialogue share the responsibility of maintaining fluency across turns, and therefore entails how fluency is displayed in collaboration. The consequence is that second language users are to be considered for their emergent co-constructed ability to interact with others by making sense of each other's actions. Therefore, second language users are to be assessed for their ability to understand the actions accomplished by prior turns at talk and to respond to those actions with relevant and fitting turns at talk. That is the ability that Salaberry and Kunitz in their recent volume dedicated to teaching and testing interactional competence understand as interactional competence. So in line with these principles, the Common European Framework introduced the distinction between receptive, productive, and interactive activities and strategies, highlighting that in interactive activities, the language user acts alternately as speaker and listener with one or more interlocutors, so as to construct conjointly through the negotiation of meaning, following the cooperative principle, conversational discourse. And coherently, the Common European Framework proposes a class of strategies exclusive to interaction, in addition to receptive and productive strategies, which enable the speaker to manage the process of collective creation of meaning, establishing a common ground, defining what can be considered as given information, framing the issue, proposing and evaluating solutions, if necessary, recapping or summarizing the points reached, adopting turn-taking and turn-giving strategies. Face-to-face interaction includes also the monitoring of paralinguistic and contextual features, which provide a greater redundancy in textual and linguistic terms. So we can see that interactional competence is a rather complex ability. Furthermore, Hall notes that the term interactional competence is frequently used to refer to two rather different things, namely the underlying competence of learners on which they draw to participate in their interactions, as well as the diverse language-specific linguistic forms and other resources that learners develop from their participation in diverse social contexts over time. As Sandlung and Sandquist remark, in teaching and assessing second language interactional competence, this argument is particularly important as test constructors and raters face the task of deciding whether a particular assessment format captures a kind of general human knowledge of social organization and interaction, along with L2 specific practices that learners have acquired. But things might get even more complicated because besides the typical context of face-to-face interaction, we also need to consider online interaction. Online interaction is a dimension that has acquired considerable importance in recent years, as evidenced by the position that this concept occupies in the complementary volume to the Common European Framework. Learning environments have changed significantly in recent decades, thanks to the increasingly pervasive use of technologies inside and outside the traditional classroom. Online interaction has some peculiar characteristics that we have to bear in mind, such as the possibility to find and share materials and resources. The cases of misunderstanding are more frequent than in face-to-face communication, and that interactants have specific needs, such as highlighting the meaning of the message using redundancy or reformulation, or the need to receive immediate feedback. Since online communication is unlikely ever to be the same as face-to-face interaction, and that the properties of group interaction online are almost impossible to capture in traditional competence scales, the companion volume proposes new descriptors for online interaction, namely online conversation and discussion, and goal-oriented online transactions and collaboration. Interaction strategies are slightly modified in the companion volume, but include the same illustrative scales that we know since the 2001 edition for taking the floor, cooperating, and asking for clarification. The written interaction that characterizes e-learning environments has been extensively studied since the 1990s, and e-learning system consists of, as you will know, a virtual learning environment created through a platform that is a specific software within which is possible to provide training, manage, monitor the learning path, and access a series of tools for communications, such as a forum or the chat. And e-learning allows for various forms of synchronous and asynchronous communication, one-to-one, one-to-many, and many-to-many communication. Thanks to these characteristics, e-learning favors collaborative learning methods and the creating of learning communities. Works on synchronous online interaction are relatively more recent and fewer. Synchronous online teaching allows for real-time interaction between students and teachers, and the ability to interact synchronously makes up software such as our Microsoft Teams or Zoom. Particularly suitable for implementing communicative approaches and methods based on the oral dimension of the language, and which involve the frequent use of techniques such as role play and discussion. Microsoft Teams and Zoom are software rich of functions which ensure various types of communication within the classroom. Video conferences can be organized with contemporary use of the chat. Teachers and learners can work collaboratively on shared files. In addition, subgroups, the so-called breakout rooms, can be created, allowing students to work in small groups. under the guidance of the teacher, who can enter each room and monitor the work and offer support. In order to understand what happens in our online language classrooms, we realized a study based on the analysis of transcripts of video recorded online language lessons. As most of the educational institutions in March 2020, the University of Foreigners of Perugia moved from the traditional face-to-face language courses to distance language courses. Our choice integrated synchronous lessons in video conference through Microsoft Teams and asynchronous lessons on the Moodle platform. Potentially, in our distance language courses, the advantages deriving from the possibility of interacting in synchronous mode are combined with those of the e-learning, that is, face-to-face teaching and the space-time freedom that allows to work individually according to one's own needs and rhythms, but also to strengthen the collaborative mechanisms within the class throughout group activities and discussions. However, our Italian teachers find that interaction with the use of synchronous video conferencing tools worsened, similarly to what Fragai, Frater, and Gianfrancesco found with respect to the situation of distance learning Italian in the first months of the pandemic. In their research, more than half of the Italian teachers expressed dissatisfaction. So we started our research with two main questions. Why do two Italian teachers find the interaction worsened compared to face-to-face lessons? And which online teaching methods and techniques favor the development of interactive competence and confluence in L2 Italian? In general, Italian language teachers consider classroom interaction as an essential part of face-to-face Italian language lessons, and no one questions the importance attributed to interaction in language use and learning, considering its central role in communication. However, as Walsh observes, most of what happens in the second language classroom, and in particular in the assessment, is more about individual performance than collective competence. There is a tendency to emphasize the learner's ability to produce correct sentences rather than negotiating meanings, that is, fluency and accuracy are placed before confluence. So what do we see in the transcripts in our online language classes? Certainly one of the critical aspects that emerges is the unidirectionality of communication, and that the classroom talk is dominated by the teacher talk. The organization of the interaction predominantly follows the STAR model. The method adopted is mainly frontal teaching. We assist to an initial monologue made by the teacher, who introduces the topic and then makes questions to the students, who intervene in a very guided way. As a result, in many lessons, the interactive modalities are partially limited due to the choice of the method made by the teacher. So to better understand why interaction is problematic in synchronous online courses, we administered an additional survey to teachers of Italian language and culture. The questions concerned asynchronous lessons on the Moodle platform and the synchronous video conferencing lessons through Microsoft Teams. So let's see a selected set of questions starting with the e-learning activities. So what kind of activities do you create on the Moodle platform that allows collaboration and interaction between students? To this question, the most frequently answer was forum. Much less use is chat or the combination of activities to carry out projects or tasks. Other Moodle activities such as wiki, workshop, glossary, or other solutions that allow peer correction are used only by a very few teachers. To the following question, what kind of interaction allow the activities you create on Moodle? The most frequent answer was the interaction pattern teacher single learner. For example, the teacher gives feedback on individual assignment, followed by teacher-learner interaction. For example, learners answer to the teacher's input on the forum. And the full class interaction, for example, everyone participates in a discussion forum. Few teachers propose activities to be carried out in small groups. For example, students realize a glossary with the most important terms of the lesson, or in pairs, so learners, for example, working in pair using a chat. So to the question, what are the main challenges of interaction on Moodle? I have selected only two aspects highlighted by the teachers that you see divided into the two columns. On the one side, we find the lack of willingness to collaborate and the lack of appreciation of activities such as the forum by specific type of students. On the other side, the limited technological competence of the teacher, but also of the students. So let's shortly see the synchronous activities in video conferencing. So what kind of activities do you propose on Teams that allow collaboration and interaction between students? Here, sharing documents is the most frequent answer, which is an activity basically led by the teacher. Less than a half propose small group activities in separate channels in breakout rooms.
1 minute left.
What are the main difficulties in managing interaction on Teams? In synchronous lessons, various teachers pointed out some negative aspects depending on technological factors such as connection problems with the audio, webcams disabled by the students, and students' incompetence to use the tool. So, for example, they are not able to move between classrooms. In addition to technical problems, the reluctance of students and the lack of willingness to collaborate are noticed. So, what solutions did our teachers adopt to face these challenges? The solutions adopted by the teachers concern, on one hand, the engagement of the students through establishing specific rules, which includes the request to turn on the webcam and show themselves, and various solutions related to technology. For example, use what you are sure of, avoiding the use of innovative methods and techniques, contact the technician or colleagues, and one person mentioned the flipped classroom as a possible solution. In our transcripts, we obviously find also some good practices as well, where we can observe the positive effect of the methodological choices operated by the teacher. When teachers use breakout rooms and let students work in small groups, proposing challenging tasks, and the interaction gets rich and learners display a wide set of strategies. In the following example that unfortunately I won't have the time to read you completely, the students interpret a diagram together in a breakout room. It is a good example of how learners deal with the difficulties deriving from the tool. For example, here the first example, as you see, they are dealing with the problems with the audio. Someone is asking, so who is there now? Joy, are you there? And Joy answers, tell me. I can't hear you very well. They are checking the channel and trying to deal with the problems presented by the work online. But they also apply several strategies to move forward in the interaction and to cooperate in order to execute the task assigned. Giving the floor to each other, taking the floor, proposing summaries, and asking for clarification when something is not clear. For example, here there's a word that one of the students cannot understand, the average. So the learner asks the other learner to clarify this concept. In order to solve the problem and to arrive at a common solution. What do these good practices suggest? The use of paired and group tasks in classroom and assessment contexts have the potential to tap into a wide range of learners' interactional ability. Of giving the floor, cooperating, asking for clarification, giving clarification, including specific strategies needed in online communication, for example, the need for an immediate feedback. It is necessary to offer more opportunities in the classroom to develop discourse competence in Italian through the use of learning activities that are meaningful and engaging for the learner, and that encourage interaction rather than individual production. Information gap activities, group story building, spot the difference, communicative crosswords are examples of activities that give learners the opportunity to develop their communicative competence through negotiation of meaning as they share information. asking for clarification, rephrasing, confirming what you think you have understood are all strategies for negotiation of meaning that they apply. So even though the construct of interactional competence has been discussed in a number of publications and refined over the last 2 decades, there have been only a few attempts to examining learners and teachers' interactional competence in synchronous online language classes. Although the advancement in technology have made synchronous online teaching possible, our study has shown that teachers need specific technological competencies so that they can use them successfully. Platforms and tools such as Microsoft Teams provide multiple modes of interacting and opportunities for smaller group activities, but teachers need to feel competent in using them in their classrooms. This requires knowledge of some specific tools, but also the ability to manage these activities. Teachers need to feel comfortable combining tools and to multitask between speaking, sharing a presentation or a document, keeping an eye on the chat box, using the keyboard, interacting at a multiple level, being aware of the students, noticing, giving cues for taking turns. Using breakout rooms was seen as an essential for students to interact in small groups, but teachers need to set challenging tasks or questions for the student to discuss. Otherwise, they may struggle to communicate. So for both synchronous and asynchronous activities, technical skills are necessary, but they are not sufficient. It is also necessary to master approaches and methods suitable for new learning environments. In particular, methods based on cooperative and collaborative group activities. Working in pairs and in small groups must acquire more space in distance learning to allow greater student engagement and to ensure more student speaking time. The management of computer-assisted language learning requires specific skills, which concern not only the technical dimension, but also the pedagogical aspect related to the use of methodologically appropriate teaching practices. In other words, the conscious use of information and communication technologies and the network for online teaching implies that teachers also master the teaching approaches and methods suitable for the new learning environments. A common issue raised was the increase in the amount of teacher talking time and the fact that lessons can become very teacher-centered. Teachers often feel themselves talking to an empty room, and this issue is conflated by some of the technological limitations, which for example, teachers only allocating specific learners to speak at what time using the mute feature, and also social cultural norms such as the fear of interrupting teacher talk. So it is very important to establish clear modes for interacting and to set agreed rules for interacting in the online classroom. For teachers, it is important to recognize the additional competencies they need to mediate and facilitate interaction during online language courses and actively explore them in relation to their own context and practices. I hope that our considerations might represent a tool for online language teachers to adapt practices and techniques suitable to engage learners in activities able to promote their interactional competence. So thank you very much for your attention. I leave you some references I cited during the presentation.